Rather than allowing the gospel to define evil, what is evil, we've allowed our culture and our religious systems that have done nothing but eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil from the beginning to continue to tell us what constitutes not only good and evil, but what constitutes just and unjust.
Evil, today, on In the Shadow of the Cross. Welcome back to another edition of In the Shadow of the Cross, Season 2. And I am Loren Rosser, joined once again by my friends Jim Durkin.
Hello.
And Mephistopheles.
You see that, Jim? He just owned Mephistopheles as his friend.
Which is Michael Harden. And Michael Harden, explain Mephistopheles.
Well, so, each week I pick a name to go by. And since we're going to be discussing things like the devil today, I thought I would be a little clever and use the Enlightenment term for the devil, which is Mephistopheles. And it comes from Goethe's Faust. And it refers to the devil not so much as a moral seducer as an intellectual seducer.
So there you have it. And he touched on what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking today about evil. So today we're going to be looking at, we had somebody post a question, which they've since removed, but they posted a question on YouTube about the nature of God and a question along the lines of suffering. Because in our last podcast, Michael mentioned that with the gospel teaches us how to suffer, and without suffering, you have no gospel. And we thought that would be a really cool thing to unpack. So the place we thought would be a good place to start with that is talking about evil. So where do we begin talking about evil?
Where would we want to begin if we're going to talk about evil? Come on now. Where do we start? Everywhere.
The Garden of Eden.
No, the Garden of Gethsemane.
Oh, okay.
Think about this.
Well, one of those gardens, anyhow.
Yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm sitting at a desk that doesn't have a workable pen, and I'm realizing I don't have anything to take notes with except a big fat Sharpie. So these are going to be some wild notes.
Gonna have some big notes, yeah.
So let's ask the question: what happens if we begin our narrative of evil with the Genesis text, and what happens if we begin our narrative of evil with the Passion text? Is there a difference? Is there a difference? Okay. Is there a similarity?
Yes.
What's the similarity first?
The similarity would be that both have the presence of the knowledge of good and evil taking place involved in the suffering. In Gethsemane, it would be causing the suffering because the knowledge of good and evil is causing them to perceive Jesus as being evil.
What's going on in both gardens? A test.
Oh, okay.
A test.
Mm-hmm.
A test to see the response of the human figure that's interacting with divinity. In the Garden of Eden, it's the male-female. In, of course, Gethsemane, it's not just Jesus, but it's the disciples. And it's also going to include in the narrative the temple police. Okay, the Genesis narrative. Both of these narratives have to do with choice, making a choice. What is it that the couple quote chooses to do? They choose to know what it is to be like God, to know good and evil. What is it that Jesus refuses to do? What does he refuse to do? He refuses to, quote, be like a god and ask his father, who is not like the other gods, to be like a god and send legions of angels. That was a possibility, right?
Yeah.
Now, Is that something that was in the Father's will to send legions of angels to save Jesus?
No.
Was that in? No, wasn't in his will at all. Could it be done?
Yes.
Yes.
Did Jesus refuse that?
Yes.
He wouldn't put the Father to the test, did he?
Right. No, he wouldn't.
Does Jesus know evil in the Garden of Gethsemane? Is he aware of good and evil? And if so, what is good and what is evil in Jesus' choice? Good is to do the will of the Father and
Right.
to suffer righteously and with mercy, compassion, and forgiveness for those that are persecuting him. He is going to live out the Sermon on the Mount here,
Right.
right? Okay. The evil that he refuses is the evil of retribution, retaliation, and the category of justice. Think about this. Would it have been just for Jesus, the Son of the Father, to call legions of angels down to defend him from being crucified?
Well,
Would that be just?
by the way we define justice,
Absolutely.
yes, absolutely.
Right? But that's not there. Right? So in the garden, when you go to the garden, if you're gonna talk about evil in the garden, that's one thing we're gonna do tonight. We're gonna work that Genesis text, gonna massage it because it's an extraordinary text from a Jewish perspective on evil. But in the Christian tradition, for me, if I want to understand the character, the radical character of evil, what makes evil evil, I have to start with the passion narrative. And I have to ask, what is evil in this narrative? And what is evil in that narrative? Is this scapegoating phenomenon of all against one? All against one. You with me?
Right. Yes.
So when we come to Genesis, the Genesis, I'm going to use the term myth, myth, but I don't want that to be interpreted to mean I'm seeing it in the same way I would interpret a Homeric myth and Aztec myth. I'm using it in the very specific mimetic theoretical sense of a narrative of origins that hides any traces of violence against victims. That's very specifically the
So
definition
so
of myth.
just so just to clarify what you mean by myth, you're saying that that's an origin of something, but it's told in a way where you're hiding the victim in that story.
Correct. And the example that Girard and Girardians we all love to use is the story of Oedipus, who in the myth is in the original myth is guilty, sees himself as guilty. He deserves to die. He's done all these things. He killed his dad, married his mom. Okay, all the bad stuff, all the taboo stuff. But in the later play by Sophocles, Oedipus Rex, Sophocles makes a turn, and he has Oedipus question at one point in the play whether or not he in fact killed him, because Oedipus says, I heard a tale told that a turba, a mob, killed Theseus, my father, right?
Yeah.
So now you're starting to see the Greek playwrights begin to unpack Oedipus's guilt or innocence here by just inserting that little, I heard it was a mob. And so the myth
Right.
the myth is now starting to break down in Greek culture. Well, one of the beautiful things about scripture is that it does precisely the same thing, because myths are expression of culture and religion. And one of the things, well, I mean, if there's anything that scripture is about from the beginning to the end, is you shall have no religion, you shall have no gods before me. There's just you and me. There's no religion.
Yeah.
And we find in the Genesis narrative now this telling of a story that moves from a couple, but by the time you get to the end of the myth in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel, which is just a way to say we've got this sacrificial mechanism in place. You got to remember, like Apocalypto by Mel Gibson, where they're sacrificing people at the top and rolling the heads down the steps, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of this narrative, the humans are going, we're going to build this thing to heaven. In other words, we're going to make sure this way of thinking has divine authorization.
Okay.
right? And what
Yeah.
does God do? Oh no, 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 no. See, the thing is that when we come to these texts, we go, oh, look at how proud they were. This has nothing to do with pride. It has everything to
Mm.
do with religion and sacrifice. And when we get that, what we're hearing is God saying no to this way we have started to structure our world, uh, in from Genesis 3 forward, how we've structured our world. So if I could do a
Okay.
quick run through, just real quick, the beauty of the text here is you have this couple in this garden with this talking snake. Now, let's all admit snakes don't talk,
What?
and yeah, right. And unless you're gonna do some kind of superstitious thing that God could make any snake talk he wants. He made a jackass talk to Balaam and all that. Okay, I guess if you want to go there, you can go there. But in my world, that kind of doesn't work, and that's fine. But you have this. You have the male, you have the female, you have the snake. Now, what's really key here is to understand that we are the writer is trying to give us the dynamic of a relationship. And this relationship is fundamentally going to have to do with imitation. And you'll notice that the command is given: don't eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil. Don't do that. That's not for you. Okay. The woman eats the fruit. What happens?
The man copies.
Well, but nothing happens.
Oh, nothing happens. Right.
Is
Yeah.
she gonna die? Did she die?
No.
Was there any indication she was gonna die?
No.
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 Does she have knowledge of good and evil?
I don't think so. No.
No. When does the knowledge of good and evil arise?
After the man eats.
After the man eats, because the man copies her. He imitates her action. Now, the man and the woman, instead of imitating the divine, are imitating each other. And
Okay.
that is as you know, is the beginning of how we understand human relations. The problem of human relations is that when we imitate each other, we end up in a rivalry. When we end up in a rivalry, there has to be a winner and a loser. Okay, so we're going to move right away from this eating of the fruit into this blame game.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, bam!
Yeah.
It says, "I it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. It wasn't me." Right? Okay.
Yeah.
And immediately from that comes an expulsion from the tree of life. Now, to be exiled from the Garden of Eden was a gift of grace.
Mm-hmm.
Because had we eaten that tree of life, we would have been stuck in this forever, so to speak. Right? And so
Yeah.
the same action is taken in the expulsion of the garden as is taken at the end of the narrative with the expulsion of the peoples into different language groups so they couldn't understand each other.
Yeah.
Right? But who's really getting expelled in this narrative? God. The humans do not want whatever it is the divine is offering.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
through the whole narrative. And so you go
Mm-hmm.
right from this mimetic desire, very Girardian, to sacrifice, Cain and Abel, murder, death, revenge. And for the first time ever in ancient literature, the voice of the victim has been found. Your brother's blood cries out from the ground. In other words, divinity hears the voice of the victim.
Yeah.
That's the first time that's in a myth. You never find that in a myth, right? So here the Bible is really trying to flash lights all everywhere, but lots of lights. Pay attention, pay attention. This is happening here. And of course, God does not bring justice to Abel, does he?
No.
There is
Not
no
really.
justice for Abel.
Yeah.
Not in the way that it's defined in terms of the way we do justice, right?
Yeah, because let me pause you just 1 second, because I remember reading that passage, especially in my teen years, and it would really bother me that he just marks Cain and goes, "Go on your merry way, don't let anybody touch him." I'm like, I'm watching Die Hard, I'm watching, and I'm like, what the hell, God? This is
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
So go ahead, pick it up.
Well, so you move from there, and when God marks Cain, as you noted, he says, if anybody touches Cain, there's going to be a sevenfold vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that should put the fear of some kind of a God into you, because you don't want to kill somebody and then have seven of your family members slaughtered, right? Okay, so
Right.
what you get this little genealogy thing, and then you get the next character is Lamech, and Lamech says, "Hey, I'm at the top of the heap. A little boy scratched me, and I killed him. My vengeance is 70-fold."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, scratched my arm, killed him. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But then you move from there into genealogy again, and then into the flood story. And three times at the very beginning of the flood story, it says the earth was full of homosexuality, licentiousness, drinking, abortion, all these terrible, terrible things. It doesn't say that.
No, no.
Three times it says the earth was full of
Violence.
violence.
Mm-hmm.
Violence. In other words, humanity already by chapter 6 of Genesis, already by chapter 6 is on a course of mutually assured destruction. I mean, dudes, this is 6 chapters into the Bible and we're getting ready to write the ending, as a
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
species.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, here, well, how are we going to deal with this? Well, we're going to kind of have to do a reboot, and that means we got to get the virus out of the system. And so here come the floods. We do the reboot, and we have sacrifice. Right off the bat, Noah's offering a sacrifice off the ark. Those, by the way, were the unicorns, and that's why unicorns no longer exist.
Exactly.
I
Right.
mean, I mean, can you see all the animals going? Oh, jeez, who's he going to choose? Who's he going to choose? We're the last of our species. No, so you have sacrifice, and then of course you have the Tower of Babel narrative, which finishes off that whole narrative, and it's all about sacrifice from Abel to Babel, right?
Yeah.
So the Jewish train of thought is very, very, very clear that whatever we're going to call evil or justice or anything, it's bound and locked up with the question of sacrifice and divinity. And that's precisely what the Passion narrative is about, right? Second, and I've said this before, as Gerard pointed out, the Passion narrative and myth have the same structure for a reason, because the Passion narrative, according to Renee, is the scientific way to read myth. The gospel, he says, is the science of mythology. So we are being taught by the gospel how to read our originary stories through eyes that have been opened rather than through closed eyes. Let me give you an example. In America, I grew up as a kid. We had Thanksgiving. The Indians were nice to the Pilgrims. We had Columbus Day. Yay, somebody came and discovered America. We had Christmas. Baby Jesus came down. We had Holy Week. You have all these holidays. And there came a point in my life where I discovered that, oh, the Pilgrims weren't so nice to the Indians, and the baby Jesus story didn't happen the way I was told, and Columbus was a colonizer. I'm having my myths overturned, right? Well, that's
Yes.
all of us in the postmodern age. All of our myths are being overturned. This is one of the reasons we are so lost. Is these originary myths that we once had are no longer myths. Now, there are those in the universities who want to replace that myth with an alternate myth, which still carries with it sacrifice, retribution, everything else. And this, I would include in this, and it's really going to irk some people, but I would include in this attempts to use critical race theory in a polarizing manner. Okay. But then you also have the false mythology, and we discussed this a few weeks back, that we're given in church, this false myth of church history and how our tradition is the true tradition. We can trace it all the way back, kind of thing.
Right.
So the gospel comes in to busts our mythology. That's the first thing. But what if our mythology gives us a definition of evil and we bring that definition into the gospel. Is it going to work?
No, that would mess things up.
It would really, and that's precisely what's happened.
Wow.
Yeah. Rather than allowing the gospel to define evil, what is evil, we've allowed our culture and our religious systems that have done nothing but eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil from the beginning to continue to tell us what constitutes not only good and evil, but what constitutes just and unjust. It has us laying out the world in binary categories: the holy, the unholy, the clean, the unclean. It has us doing this with everybody. And if you're a good guy, I like you. If you're a bad guy, I don't want you to, we raise our kids with the same way. We tell them, hang out with the good kids, not the bad kids. Right?
Yeah.
When in fact, to be honest, I was one of those bad kids, growing
Really?
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish everyone could see.
Oh, that was precious. That was precious.
I wish everyone could see Jim's expression when he said really. It was like, oh, big surprise.
But look, again, the thing is that the gospel, if as long as we bring definitions from outside, and we don't allow the passion narrative, the cross, to be that absolute moment that helps us define everything so that we can reorient ourselves, we lose. Then I'll stop there for now.
Wow. There's a lot there to unpack. So, Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well,
Bibbidi bobbidi boop.
yeah, exactly. It would be difficult to add a lot to what Michael just shared, because I think he did an outstanding job of explaining that the majority of humanity thinks of evil as all the bad things that other people do. And, righteousness is the good that I do, or something, and oh yeah, occasionally I do something bad, but I'm not an evil person. I mean, basically I'm a good person, Everybody else is evil, or at least, if not everybody, at least I know several people that are, and history is filled with evil people, but that's not me. And I think our measuring rod, I think it would be safe to say our measuring rod is all messed up, or maybe it's a measuring rod that we created rather than the one we should be using on what actually is evil. Mm-hmm. I do find it interesting that Michael said that we have to start in a different garden. I think for most religious people, they would start in the Garden of Eden, exactly as you said, Loren. Well, that's where it all started. I mean, okay, Eve, the narrative that I was raised with is that Eve was deceived. And the reason it's Adam's sin is because he wasn't. God didn't tell Eve not to eat. God told Adam not to eat. And blah, blah, blah,
like
blah, 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 blah.
Every man on the planet, Adam didn't tell Eve.
Yeah, just, well, have you ever tried to tell your wife anything?
Okay. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot
Yes, I went there.
Oh. I'm telling your wife to listen to this episode.
I just want to say, Jim, it was really nice knowing you.
Yeah,
she doesn't listen to any of them.
We'll send her this. I've got her phone number.
Blackmail.
Exactly. So So you start there with the wrong, and here we are, um young Earth theory. Here we are, 6,000 years later, and you know, the reason there's evil in the world is because Adam blew it. You know, and it's like the whole narrative has to be, well, I was going to say has to be taken apart and re-examined, but
Mhm.
probably uh, it just needs to be thrown in the fires of hell and, and come up with a whole new narrative. By the way, one of these days I'm going to take time and give you my perspective of the two podcasts you guys did without me.
Okay.
Why am I shaking in my boots?
I know. We're in trouble, Michael. We're in trouble.
I mean,
Daddy's home.
Daddy's home. Oh no.
But the interesting thing is what I, even before you started unpacking it, Michael, when you said it was the Garden of Gethsemane, my mind went to the place of, I want to hear what you have to say, but I think I get it.
Hmm.
Because if you listen to Jesus's answer, nevertheless, not my will, your will be done. And Adam's, what you're saying basically is, yeah, I know God's will, but in this case, I think I'm going to invoke my own will.
Well, we can we stop for a second, break that down, parse it.
Yeah,
Um, and by the way, again, this episode and whatever we're going to do, the episode for next week, they're going to tie together. So the theodicy question we're going to hold off for next week, right?
yeah, right.
Because we're looking at text today. First, remind me, Jim, to come back to the Philippians 2 text.
Okay.
But in the Genesis text, for example, if you start there with the Genesis text, you have to ask the real question you have to ask is there so-called free will in the text when we look at free will, right? And we go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, there must be because God gives a command. Okay, God gives us free will to obey or not. Now the woman disobeys and nothing happens. Again, why does why do things happen when the man eats it?
Because he copied.
The woman is not copying anyone or anything. Okay? And in other words, here's the thing. And this I don't mean to upset readers or anything, but the male, the female, and the snake do not represent a male, a female, or a talking snake. We can see these as symbols of human psychology. Okay, this is how I would prefer to read a text like this, is anthropologically, because the dynamics of exploring the text anthropologically are far richer and far more pertinent to how to deal with real life situations in our world today than to read them through this kind of theological, philosophical lens that explains where evil came from, as though you
Mm-hmm.
could explain evil, as
Right.
though evil was a category that could be to explain, to take the deception out of, ex plano, to remove the deception. You remove the deception from evil, it ceases to exist. You cannot explain evil without it doesn't continue to exist. And think about the Western tradition. We've got all these explanations for evil, and evil still exists in our world, the way we frame our world, right? But in the gospel, does evil exist? No. It has been crucified. It's dead. It
Right.
ceased to exist. What is it? What is it that exists? Boom, resurrection and new life. That's existence. So I'm preferring to read these texts, these early texts, in a more anthropological fashion. And if you take the man, the woman, and the snake, what you have here is this, again, this triangle of desire, mediated desire. We only want what other people want. We model their wants. And when we do that, knowing or not knowing that there is a limited supply of everything, if we all want the same thing, we have trouble, don't we? Okay.
Yeah.
The text is trying to really show us something about the character of the knowledge of good and evil. What does the knowledge of good and evil bring? It brings about religion, sacrifice. It brings about idolatry, false views of God. The knowledge of good and evil is not a healthy thing to have. Okay?
Yeah.
What is when you're a little child, 4, 5, 6 years old, and you got? I mean, I have few memories of back then, but do you? Do you remember playing
Yeah.
out in the backyard
Yeah.
and how you could turn a tree into a castle or a
Oh
starship or
yeah.
something else, and
Oh,
for
yeah.
hours and hours you could play and play and play and play. You had this imagination, this ran wild. Right? You didn't think about evil. I mean, there was the quote, things you were challenged by, whatever, but we weren't thinking of evil, right?
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun. Now, we've lost that capacity, and the gospel gives it back to us. Jesus says, unless you become like little children, you can't enter the kingdom. We go, oh, little children are humble. Baloney. I've seen some pretty cocky kids,
It's true.
little children are helpless. No, they're not.
Hmm.
you know.
Hmm.
So, what's the analogy we're to draw with little children? And I would argue that the thing that Jesus is saying is little children have an imagination. They can imagine what I'm imagining, the reign of God here. They can imagine it. Don't stop children from coming, because we are meant to be imaginative, creative, fun loving, tree playing, backyard romping people. That's what we're meant to be
Right.
in
Yeah.
relation to the Father and each other, not a people governed by rules and regulations or the knowledge of good and evil.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is that when we look at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is that it wasn't that God was saying, don't eat from that tree because you'll have the knowledge of evil. It's the
Hmm.
knowledge of good and evil.
That's right.
we
And
and notice it says they'll be like God. And
they'll be
that's
able
our
to discriminate.
exactly. And that's the because they move from trust, which is what
Hmm.
we see in Jesus. They move from
Hmm.
trust to operating out of their own. Basically, it's this: I don't need you, Father, because I can discern good and evil on my own. So
Yes.
I've got this thing down.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. If you have a moral code like we do today, and you go to church today, you get a moral code. Okay, let's see. I haven't murdered anybody. I go to church on Sunday. I respect my parents. I'm faithful to my spouse. Oh, hey, I'm good. I'm all good. I know what good is. That guy across the street, friggin' drunk, you know, does this, that, and he's bad. I'm good. And once we start that, we lose,
Yeah.
because we turn that into that we turn that moral distinction into racial distinction, economic distinction, and every other kind of distinction. Because what is it that we seek when we are in a mimetic crisis? Difference or distinction, because we can't be the same. It's not our differences that cause our problems. It's when we're all the same, and we need to distinguish ourselves. And that's, I mean, Jim has more experience of this than I do in the charismatic movement, but it's been my impression in the charismatic movement that you're always trying to distinguish yourself a little bit from the guy you were mentored under. So the person that mentors you has a vision of 3 secrets to the kingdom. Well, you come out with 7, and then your protege comes out with 9, and everybody's out trying to outdo everybody. And that's the problem of the need to be different. They need to be distinct. They need
Well,
to have an identity
I,
that's not a mob identity.
I think there's both things. What you described, certainly, you know, and it's promoted many times. Certainly, I'm more familiar with charismatic circles, so
Mm-hmm.
that my ceiling becomes your floor. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's in other words, I want you to do you know and Jesus said it's enough that the student becomes as his master, not better than or
Mm-hmm.
exceed or
Mm-hmm.
Elijah syndrome. I want double what you did.
Yeah, right.
But the other side of it is um I think what you were talking about, Adam and Eve. So I'm not a theologian.
Really?
Yeah, shut up. But now I'm friends with Michael, so I need to start using bigger words, and I need to start talking about mimetic theory, and I need to read Rene Girard, and I need to so that I can be like Michael.
I'm so happy you finally seen the light, my brother. This is beautiful.
And so you have both things,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
copycat thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then I want to be better than my mentor was.
Mm-hmm.
And in Christian circles, let's take the Ephesians model of apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, teacher. So somebody decides that it's not good enough to be a pastor. I've got to be an apostle, but I probably have to be a prophet first, because I have to work through, you know, you don't jump up to the top rung of the ladder. You have to go up one step at a time. So I'm going to look around the room or around Christianity, and I'm going to find a prophet that I'm going to study his way or her way of doing it, and I'm going to be just like him or her, and eventually I'll be an apostle, and then I can be like so and so, and it's like it's it's as evil inside the church
Mm-hmm.
as what we see outside the church. It's still
Mm-hmm.
uh it's not submitting to the Christ within. It's not submitting to our Father, who says, you know, you were fearfully and wonderfully made. If you want to go back to an Old Testament scripture, I made you. I didn't make. Uh, you know, I'm just gonna. I'm not gonna drop names here. I didn't make Michael Harden 2.0. And so work out the bugs and be better than him.
It was
So
my understanding that model was scrapped.
yeah, really. But yeah,
It
it's
kept
like,
crashing into things. That's what I was told.
and I think it's an interesting what we're talking about here, because who who would say, when talking about evil or describing evil, who would say that evil exists within the church every bit as much as it does outside of the church?
Right.
Not too many people would say that, you know.
Well, they wouldn't say it about their church, but they'd say it about other churches,
It-
other
Oh well,
traditions.
yeah,
no, that's true.
okay, yeah,
No, but they
yeah.
would.
Oh yeah, and their definition would be starting starting with beliefs, doctrines, then go to worship styles,
Mm-hmm.
and and then go to the sins of leadership.
Yeah, but it's interesting because when Lily and I were youth pastors and the church we were in, before we knew any of this about mimetic theory and sacrifice or any of this, Lily tends to see pictures, see visions. We were in a worship service and Lily shared with me afterwards, she goes, I saw this knife that was spinning around and then it would pick a target and fly at that person. And
Wow.
it took us years to figure out after the knife hit us that it was that thing of sacrifice that we're talking about, the mimetic theory of we need someone to sacrifice, and that was very much functioning in that congregation where
Yeah.
there would be somebody who would be the bottom of the rung, the bad person, the person targeted by the community, and all the heat would go on that person until that
Yeah.
person left, and then there
Yeah.
would be a sense of relief.
Yeah.
Everything's good. That person's gone. That false prophet, that Jezebel, whatever it was, and then eventually it would start again. There would have to be somebody else who would have to go on the altar. And that is, as Michael has shared before, that's what kept the peace in the community, was having that sacrifice. And eventually, Lily and I didn't become aware of it until it was our turn.
That's right. And now there's a great book on this, Loren, and it's by Shirley Jackson called The Lottery. Have you ever read it? Real short story.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
So you can either read the book, it's very short, it's online, it's free, or you can go to YouTube and Google Shirley Jackson, The Lottery. It's a little 30-minute movie they made, but it tells that exact story. It's a little town in like New England, and every year they celebrate a festival a certain day of the year, and all the families come together, and then they have a lottery. And that lottery, of course, is the Joshua 7 type lottery. And this woman,
Ah,
the whole story, she's going around, praise this day, love this day, it's a great day, and but on that day, her number comes up. And all of a sudden, this isn't right, this isn't fair, this is unjust, right?
exactly.
So there's the human story in a novel form. There's your story, my story, Jim's story, brilliantly expressed, but then it's no different than the passion narrative, is it?
It's not, and that's the thing. It's
All
like,
against one.
right, and that's the thing when we talk about evil. That's the thing. After going through that, and then growing and learning these things, it caused me the whole time I was a teacher. I would keep my eyes open. Who's the student here? Who's the target? And you would see it.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
interesting thing is, though, when I taught in it was basically an impoverished, dominantly Hispanic school.
Hmm.
It never happened. It's
Right.
really weird. It never happened. In fact, my daughter, she attended that school. Somebody tried to make fun of her, and she said 3 students stood up for her, and it immediately shut down. Where at the school I taught at later, that was more economically advanced,
Mm.
it was very prevalent, like constantly trying to find the target who's going to be the one to bring down. And what, let me just say this, the reason why I asked Michaela, why do you think that didn't exist at the other school? She goes, because a lot of them were immigrants and stuff. They know what it is to be the outcast, the underdog, so they didn't
Yeah.
have that mentality. So go ahead, Michael.
Well, let me ask you. I don't know if this is a fair question, but in the second school you were at, was it primarily a WASPIS, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant school?
It was actually mixed. It was pretty equal among the. It was. I would say it was
Would
almost
you? Would
50.
you?
It was almost
50-50
50-50
Catholic?
black and white.
No, I'm not black and white. I'm trying to think of religious traditions here because
Oh,
Hispanics are
very.
going to be Catholic
They were
as a
Catholic.
rule. Okay,
Yes, they were dominantly Catholic. The
they
future
have
one Protestant.
they have a sacrificial apparatus in place, especially Mexican or Spanish Catholicism, which is loaded with festivals related to sacrifice and the dead and everything else.
Yeah,
The Protestant tradition, we whitewash sacrifice. We don't have quote superstitious sacrificial mechanisms. No, ours are all biblically rational,
Right.
right? But they don't work. And so
Yeah.
the I would argue the Hispanic kids in their religious orientation had an outlet,
I
whereas the
never thought of
Protestants
that.
didn't.
That's
Mm.
brilliant. No, that gave me goosebumps because you're absolutely right. Because they were very religious, very involved in their Catholic communities. Where the second church, they were very the ones who were church going. A lot didn't have any religion, and then the ones who did, they were extremely Protestant. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I would say that Protestantism is really an extremely sacrificial religion. It's very sacrificial. And when you combine Protestantism with America, I mean, America is a Protestant country. And always, I
Yeah.
mean, you could say, okay, the first presidents were Anglican or Episcopal or whatever, and but nobody will ever forget the John Kennedy when he ran, and he was a Catholic, and he was going to be
Right.
beholden to the Pope, and right, and all that stuff.
Right.
Um, but the reality is we are a Protestant nation, and when you look at Protestantism, just as a whole, just go back to the what happens in the late 16th century, all through the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, where Protestantism goes, war, 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 war follows. War follows Protestantism in its wake. Okay,
Yeah.
it does. Now, that's not to say that Catholicism doesn't have its conquests, its inquisitions, its pogroms. It doesn't. It has all kinds of stuff. But where you find where you find tomfoolery, that's the other term for Protestantism. Where you find it, you're going to find rivalry, violence, and war. Because the reformers, when they did away with the sacrifice of the mass, they did away with that mechanism which allows Western Christian culture to be Western Christian culture. And it's taken 500 years. But we're seeing this erosion of sacrificial mechanisms. They don't work. We went after as a world in 9/11. We needed a scapegoat. We needed one. So who'd we go after? Well, we went after Osama bin Laden, couldn't find him. So we needed a scapegoat. Where'd we go next? Iraq. Saddam Hussein, perfect scapegoat, right?
Right.
Well, did it work a
No.
few years before in Libya with Gaddafi?
Yeah.
All,
I mean,
all
and
he
to
wanted,
it.
all
Yeah.
he wanted to do was put the Libyan currency on a gold standard. They killed him, right? We need a scapegoat. Well, he'll go after Osama. Nope. How about Saddam? Does he work as a scapegoat? Nope. We finally get Osama bin Laden. Is he a good scapegoat? Nope. Because why? It doesn't create unity. It did. When you kill a scapegoat, it recreates unity. But the gospel has undone that. The power of the gospel is that we now know that is a false mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Except for when we're justified doing it, we're doing God's will.
Right.
We're back in the
Okay.
knowledge of good and evil. We're back
Hmm.
into being seduced and lied to by the very thing itself that we think we're becoming free from. And only the
Right.
gospel can set us free.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have a question. It's going to take us back. When you talked about the garden, you said who the Garden of Gethsemane, who was the central figure there? And I think it was Loren said Jesus, and
Mm-hmm.
you said, well, what about the disciples?
Mm-hmm.
And what about the temple guards? And
Mm-hmm.
so I've been kind of just reflecting on the statement of what about the disciples?
Hmm.
And I find myself kind of thinking, about a few scenarios that I've seen in the
Right.
church world and history. There's always the ones who choose to kind of just close their eyes or go to sleep
Hmm.
and let the other people battle,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know, go
Yeah.
through their battle, not realizing that it's in the going to sleep that you've lost your battle.
Ah, well done.
Yeah.
I see
Wow.
that. I see what you did there. Nice.
Yeah. That's good. And then I'm
Yeah.
also with talking about the disciples. When Jesus tells Peter, Peter says, "Though everyone leave you, I won't deny you." When we get all
Mhm.
Peter wasn't strong enough. This goes back to the thing of the Garden of Eden. That Peter f- showed his humanity, that he imitated the people around him.
This is really important for Girard that even Peter falls away. Even Peter imitates the mob because in the end, a mythic narrative requires all against one. That's the mythic narrative. However, in the gospel, there's a really fascinating break in that narrative. And again, it's like in Genesis 1, we have the voice of the victim for the first time. Well, here we have a myth, quote, the passion narrative, the mythic structure, but it's not all against one because is not his mother there with him?
Right.
And
And the
another
disciple whom he
Mary and a
loved.
beloved see. So
Yeah.
the mechanism is already being questioned. Is it's not all against one.
Yeah.
You see, it's already we have that breakdown even before the death, and that's really important that we have these witnesses to this horrific event that can name it for what it is. Okay, so next week when we start exploring theodicy, um, we're gonna we're looking at the way the category of theodicy arose. It's an Enlightenment term. Leibniz is the first one to use it in the title of a book around 1700. And it comes from two Greek words, theos and dike. Theos meaning God, and dike being the root for righteousness or justice. And theodicy is the question of how can a just God create a world where there is evil and suffering, right? And
Yeah.
that question is not a biblical question. That's an Enlightenment question.
Mm.
It's not a biblical question. And so next week, when we explore the Enlightenment question and the responses to it, we're going to take some really cool cues from a theologian who taught at Fordham University back in the 20th century, late 20th century, Terence Tilley. And we're also going to have a little help from Anthony Thistleton, the great hermeneutic scholar from England. But we have to help our friends and those we love truly think gospelly in terms of mythically.
Yeah.
And to think in terms of the gospel is to have the quote mind of Christ. It's not to know his thoughts, it's to have that same structured worldview that he had. And of
Right.
course, we know where that starts, and that starts with trusting Papa. And we know where it ends with trusting Papa. And everything in between is about getting rich. No. It's about trusting Papa, isn't it? Isn't it? The whole
Yes.
thing, from beginning to end, is learning to trust,
Yeah.
right? That's the gospel.
I, I,
Yeah.
I, I think, yeah, what you're saying, I'm sitting here when Loren, you brought up Peter uh, denying the Lord, and I'm sitting here thinking about a narrative uh, seems to be based on human nature. Let's put it that way. So here's a guy who thinks that the reason Jesus picked him was because he's brash, he's tough, he's in your face, and he's going to be the Lord's protector at all times. And so one night the Lord says, "Okay, guys, make sure you got a sword. We're getting ready to go and do some things here." And so now here comes the temple guards, and Peter's, here it is. Here's my chance.
Yeah.
Here we
Yeah.
go. And pulls out a sword, and the same Jesus who said, make sure you have your sword, is now saying, put that thing away. If you live by that, you're going to die by that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could have called a legion of angels to come and protect me. I don't really need you. Now here's a deflated
Yeah.
man. What the
Yeah.
heck have I been doing for 3 years? I thought I was this guy's protector, and when I do try and protect him, he calls me Satan at one point. In another point, he says, put it away. And he heals the guy that I'm trying to, and he tells me I'm wrong. And you can just see this guy with his head hung down, trying to figure out what the heck have I been doing the last 3 years? And why am I hanging out with this guy? And now people say, oh, you're one of them. And I don't think I am. I think I just got scapegoated here. I just got pushed out of the crowd of my position of being the defender of this man. And now this man's telling me, I don't need you. I don't want you. Which obviously Jesus never said. He just said, I don't want your sword.
Right. Right.
But isn't it human nature to go to that deflated place of, oh, I've been rejected because what I think is my ability to show the Father's, or, walk in the Father's will to defend his son, and it gets rejected, and therefore we think I'm rejected. And so screw it. I'm out of here. I don't need this anymore.
We're going to have to talk about next week. We're going to have to really talk about the misuse of the mechanism as you've identified it, and that's where I'm the victim. Everybody
Yeah.
hates me. Nobody likes me, because that is a way of thinking. It's a strategy used by narcissists and used by evil people. And it's
Mm-hmm.
currently being used quite a bit in the mainstream news media.
Mm-hmm.
And certain politicians and celebrities and others, they like to fancy themselves as the victim. But
Right.
we're going to have to talk about that and Nietzsche next week and the Enlightenment. And this has been
Oh
And we
yeah.
might have to
interesting.
we might have to go a couple more weeks on this one.
Yeah,
Good.
and even Jim, just real quick, it's funny when you were talking about how Peter hears it. I see that all the time as a manager, where I'll hear somebody say,
Oh,
"This person said this." The director said the cruelest thing to me while we were on the director's track, and I'll play the director's track back, and he says, "Can you please move camera 6? Hello, it
yeah,
said move camera
yeah,
6." It's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yes, that was so abusive, And so I hear what you're saying. It is human nature, man. When you got those hangups, to hear what you think you're hearing and it's not true. But anyway,
Well, in the
oh, go ahead.
fantasy of my own mind, I can sit in my living room and I can dream up this whole thing of how I'm going to do something in a setting,
Yeah.
and how people are going to receive it, and it's going to be, it's going to turn things around, and people for years to come are going to say, man, what Jim did, it saved our organization. And I introduce it, and people look and say, where in the world did you get that hairball idea? We
Right.
would never do something like that.
From my cat.
That's not even yeah, really. That's not even the way we think.
Right.
And now I'm going to cancel my membership. I'm leaving. I'm. oh, those guys are all idiots. They're,
Right.
it's like, yeah. Anyhow,
I relate. Sadly, I do relate to myself, not other people. I mean, from
that's human
myself having
nature.
those moments.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, this has been a really good conversation. I'm so glad we're going to keep going next week. So, next week, everybody be sure to tune in. And in the meantime, Jim, where can people find your book?
On Amazon.
All right. And Michael, where can people find your videos and books?
YouTube and Amazon.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you all again next week.